Hi folks, Mo's here. Hey, I want to share with you this tree, and this tree actually saved thousands upon thousands of lives, and it also, in my opinion, helped spark the American Revolution. Hey, stay tuned and we'll tell you all about this. Folks, this tree is a white pine. It has 5 needles, little fascicles on here. If you break them apart and you count 5 needles, you know it's white pine. White pine is the only pine tree in our region of eastern United States that will have 5 needles. It's interesting that the Native Americans, when the Iroquois were trying to form their confederacy, the Iroquois Confederacy, they brought 5 nations together. And they brought the 5 nations together, and they stood under the protection of a white pine. And they wrote the treaty to bind those nations together, and they gave a demonstration. They asked a chief from each of the tribes to give them 1 arrow. And the first chief gave an arrow to the speaker, and the Native American took that arrow, smashed it on his leg, and said, "One arrow has no strength, just like 1 nation has no strength. But give me 5 arrows like the 5 nations." And grabbed him and held him tight, hit him on his leg and couldn't break him. He said that shows the strength of unity and to be able to be powerful. And it ended up that the Iroquois people, from that day to this day, they call this tree the tree of peace. Now, on the other side of the story, in 1772, there was a pine tree riot in the United States because King George of England sent his surveyors into the United States. He sent his surveyors in to mark the white pine tree as royal trees. These trees grew up to 200 foot tall and up to 500 years old. And the British Navy needed to have the huge white pines for the masts of their ships. And so they would go ahead and brand the trees with the Broad Arrow Act, meaning that those were trees for King George and the Royal Navy. Well, the colonists, they didn't want to have any part of that. So they banded together, and in 1772, they started the Pine Tree Riot. And they'd go out at night, and they'd cut King George's trees, and they'd haul them away, and they would use them. And the king was furious. And I believe that's the start of a spark that sparked the American Revolution. Now, we talked about the native people like the Iroquois, but all the native people used this tree. During the winter time like we have right now, they couldn't go to Florida and get oranges and grapefruits and things like that to get their vitamin C. They had to have natural foods. And they would take the needles from this white pine, and they would get hot, not boiling water, but hot, and they'd break these up, put them in there, and they'd make a tea from it. And they would drink that tea. And that tea gave them the vitamin C they needed. Scientists later came by and said, that's a bunch of BS. There's no vitamin C in there, until they tested it. And then they tested it, they found out it had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times the vitamin C that a lemon has for the same weight. It's crazy. But the Native Americans were able to survive on this. Actually, during periods of low food, they would peel the bark and they would actually eat it. And they would take tar from the tree, mix it with a little bit of sulfur, and if they had dandruff on their scalp, they would use that to get rid of the dandruff. Folks, this white pine tree today is very valuable. And just a short distance from here, about 70 miles, we have virgin white pine stands in Cook Forest State Park. If you're interested in seeing the tree that saved thousands of lives, by stopping scurvy, and that was the disease they fought by getting the vitamin C. Or C, the tree that started the pine tree revolt.